Shu Takumi had pulled off a miracle. In spite of doubts and disbelief from his colleagues and superiors, he and his team's little lawyer game had garnered a warm reception, solid sales, and even awards recognition. Against all odds, Ace Attorney had earned itself an audience, and this burgeoning firm of would-be paralegals wouldn't have long to wait for a follow-up. Takumi's turnabout trial was fated for a second summons. Gyakuten Saiban may not have turned the industry on its head the same way its protagonist solves a homicide, but the Japan exclusive did introduce both a cast of endearing characters and a workable, malleable blueprint for design and gameplay. The game had fans in high places, catching the admiration of industry figures like Hideki Kamiya, director of Resident Evil 2, and Hideo Kojima, creator of Snatcher, a foundational entry in the graphic adventure genre. Also among those impressed was Shinji Mikami, Takumi's mentor and the head of Capcom's Production Studio 4. Mikami had initially voiced serious concerns over Takumi's idea, but after trying it himself, the creator of Resident Evil had turned his thinking around. Sometime during the twilight hours of Ace Attorney's development, Mikami pulled Takumi aside and suggested making a second game, and even a third if sales were promising enough. Just like that, a sequel went from unthinkable to inevitable. Takumi took an extended vacation following Ace Attorney's completion. The day he returned, work on its follow-up began. The original game took many forms during production as Takumi brought his scattered ideas into focus. As a result, writing the game and developing it were simultaneous efforts. But with the path already laid out for the sequel, producer Atsushi Inaba wanted the story finished before a single line of code was written, assigning Takumi a scant 3.5 months to complete the game's narrative. As if that weren't enough, Inaba also demanded a fifth case to outdo the original's 4. With more murder mysteries to write, and less time to write them, Takumi was staring down the single most difficult task of his career. One so laborious, the director took up journaling his anxieties while scripting. Thankfully, through sheer force of will and love for his infant series, Takumi pulled through. A month into his writing, he had created outlines for all 5 cases, and spent the remaining months scripting each scenario. By the time he hit deadline, the story of Ace Attorney 2 was scrawled across 1,500 pages. Making good on his word, Inaba assembled a gaggle of Capcom code monkeys and put them to work. Now 10 members strong, Ace Attorney 2's development team was physically separated from the rest of Capcom's development studio, an effort on Inaba's part to allow creative practices otherwise unheard of at the company, like last-minute character additions and on-site drinking. Unfortunately, the plan to include 5 cases fell through as soon as the Game Boy Advance's limited cartridge space reared its ugly ridge. Lacking the necessary data compression tools, Takumi was faced with both an enormous last-minute rewrite and the burden of removing 1/5 of the game. The case that was dropped, involving poisoned coffee at a French restaurant, would have to be saved for a potential future entry. One massive overhaul later, Takumi and the team were ready to turn courtroom proceedings upside down all over again. Gyakuten Saiban 2 was released in Japan for the Game Boy Advance on October 18, 2002, just 1 year and 6 days after the original game's launch. Alongside Takumi and Inaba, background artist Tatsuro Iwamoto also returned. this time in a much bigger role. The first game's character designer, Kumiko Suekane, was too busy creating the cast of Capcom's upcoming action platformer Viewtiful Joe, leaving Iwamoto to take her place and design the new lineup of characters and criminals. Also absent was composer Masakazu Sugimori, who exited development of the first game before it was even finished. Audio responsibilities fell to in-house musician Naoto Tanaka, who went under the pseudonym Akemi Kimura. Tanaka had previously contributed to the music and sound effects of the Mega Man X series, and rearranged the soundtracks of Mega Man's 4, 5, and 6 for their complete works re-releases on Sony's PlayStation. Upon the game's international release 4.5 years later, the franchise traded its hometown numbering scheme in exchange for short, punchy subtitles. The second chapter in Phoenix Wright's story was dubbed Justice for All. Canonizing the gap between game releases, Justice for All took place roughly a year after the events of the original Ace Attorney, once again spinning a tale across 4 episodes. Though the number of cases remained the same, the game was nonetheless bigger than its predecessor, averaging 5 to 6 hours of more playtime. Paradoxically, the 3-day trial limit introduced in the first game now only served as an in-universe time constraint. Most cases lasted only 2 in-game days, but were nonetheless bolstered by extensive courtroom antics. Also in contrast to the previous game, Justice for All's story was told out of order, which allowed for narrative engagement beyond simply what happens next. This became apparent midway through the game's first case, the Lost Turnabout. With Ace Attorney 2, Takumi sought to create an experience for both returning fans and newcomers. To wit, creating a scenario for the opening case did not come easy, as it wouldn't make sense for Phoenix to relearn standard courtroom procedure a year into his successful career. At least, not with a functioning memory. Eventually, Takumi landed on a soap opera standard, amnesia. After a surprise attack on his cranium, Phoenix enters the courtroom barely aware of his first name, much less his profession. With the help of his client, Officer Maggie Bird, and his returning assistant, Maya Fey, both Phoenix and the player would be reacquainted with the Ace Attorney gameplay flow, including new additions to courtroom battles. Character profiles, once an unbothered viewable menu in the court record, were now fully admissible for cross-examinations, widening the window for potential statement evidence matchups. Also new was a revamped stamina system. Replacing the 5 penalty icons from the original Ace Attorney, Phoenix came to court carrying a green bar of health, reminiscent of an RPG. Though it functioned identically to the penalty icons during cross-examinations, trials often prompted players to choose the correct option or present evidence on the fly. In these moments, the variability in how much damage Phoenix risked was defined by context, adding a layer of synchronicity between game and story not seen in the previous entry. Both of these gameplay additions climaxed at a singular moment near the end of the game, in which Phoenix's entire stamina bar was risked for the correct pairing of witness profile and evidence. Like its predecessor, Justice for All's second case focused on the Fey family, expanding the clan's mythology and introducing its unsanctimonious infighting. Reunion and Turnabout brought Phoenix to Kurine Village, Maya's spiritual stomping grounds, seeped in traditional Japanese Shinto imagery, and named after the Klein-Bottle geometric principle. The case's victim, Dr. Turner Gray, is savagely gunned down in a spirit channeling chamber mid-ceremony, implicating Maya and setting up Ace Attorney's first take on a genre staple, the locked room mystery. The first game had received a bit of criticism for its inclusion of spirit channeling as a plot point, and Takumi sought to prove it had a place in his otherwise standard setting. In a first for the series, the story opens before the actual homicide, as Phoenix meets and accompanies Dr. Gray to the village at Journey's outset. Surprisingly, the most memorable and important part of the case wasn't the gruesome murder, but the quiet little girl hanging around Fey Manor's winding way. Amid the spirits and spatter was Pearl Fey, Maya's younger cousin and a member of the clan's branch family. Originally, Takumi conceived a one-time arch-nemesis for Maya to use in Reunion and Turnabout, sharing both her age and capacity for mischief. Unlike Maya, though, this new rival's troublemaking would be pointed and cruel, stemming from a loud hatred of the orphaned medium. But a member of the first game's development team suggested lowering her age to heighten the case's dramatic stakes, and in doing so, Takumi took a liking to the now 8-year-old and reversed her characterization, transforming her from a bitter antagonist to a quiet delight. Pearl endeared herself to Ace Attorney's cast and its audience without a moment to waste, idolizing her cousin and romantically pairing her with Phoenix to uncomfortable levels of fixation. Pearl's overprotective and traditionalist mother Morgan did not share her daughter's enthusiasm for cousin Maya, and represented the clan's political turmoil, as the family struggled to find unity in the 16 years since its leader, Maya's mother Misty, disappeared without a trace. Though distant with Phoenix at first as her mother instructed, Pearl quickly hopped off script and proved herself one of his greatest allies, both in her relative maturity and her strong spiritual abilities, which manifested in Justice for All's biggest gameplay addition. As well received as the first Ace Attorney was, even those involved couldn't ignore the scratches on the defense bench. In particular, the investigation segments were a point of contention. Questioning witnesses and cornering killers in the courtroom took off with players and critics just as Takumi had hoped. But hunting for evidence and parading around the crime scene didn't bring the same level of tension and thrill. It was a sentiment shared among a portion of Ace Attorney's newfound audience, including Atsushi Inaba, who tasked Takumi with devising something new to spice up Phoenix and Maya's after-court shenanigans. Like a bout of blunt force trauma, Takumi was struck with an idea. He believed Ace Attorney was primarily a game about seeing through lies. So what if that philosophy was literal? What if Phoenix Wright could see someone's lies and use evidence to eliminate them? Thus, the Psychoroku, or Psycholock, was born, eventually retitled Psyche Lock in Justice for All's English release. Using a Fey family heirloom called a Magatama, freshly imbued with powerful spiritual energy from Pearl, Phoenix could confront and challenge witnesses by presenting the proper evidence or profile, breaking each lock at a time. Presenting the wrong evidence dealt a sliver of damage to Phoenix's life bar, likewise replenishing a portion after successfully laying waste to a pack of lies. There was rarely a guarantee that Phoenix had all the evidence he needed to fully shatter a set of Psyche locks, so the option to back out of a confrontation at any time meant that players would need to be confident in their own understanding of a given witness before approaching them with the Magatama, inviting a higher level of investment and difficulty than anything seen in the previous game. The Psyche Lock's design was modeled after Japanese trick locks from the country's pre-Meiji period in the late 19th century. Psyche locks were a crucial part of Justice for All's story, and their introduction in Case 2 bled into Case 3, Turnabout Big Top. Celebrity magician Maximilian Galactica is arrested for the apparent murder of Big Berry Circus's Master of Ceremonies, Russell Berry, Galactica's employer and father figure to the scattered carnies. When writing Big Top, Takumi took influence from the game's development staff, a team of fresh-faced specialists assembled by a greater force to entertain an audience, similar to the cast of a circus. True to its name, Big Berry Circus was also plagued with interpersonal conflict. As a melodrama emerges during the investigation, the case propels Phoenix to unearth the personal tragedies casting a wide shadow over the MC's death, climaxing with one of the wildest murder plots the series has ever seen. Takumi has claimed more than once that Turnabout Big Top is one of his all-time favorite Ace Attorney cases, an ironic sentiment given its polarizing reputation among fans on opposing sides of the Pacific Ocean. If players didn't get behind Justice for All's new characters, they could always look forward to seeing returners around every corner, from the absent-minded Detective Gumshoe to Courtroom Number 4's all-seeing, unnamed judge. The inclusion of familiar faces wasn't just for fan service, though. The original Ace Attorney's development went months over schedule, and as a means to expedite production, a non-essential character from the first case was integrated as a key player in the finale, as opposed to writing, designing, and coding a brand new NPC. This last resort decision, born from crunch and time constraints, unintentionally introduced a clear sense of continuity to the game's narrative, one that strongly resonated with players. The developers cashed in on this accidental canonicity throughout Justice for All, bringing back witnesses from the previous installment, sometimes more than once. Objection! But one prominent member of the first game's cast was curiously absent: Prosecutor Miles Edgeworth. At first, Takumi was set to bring back Edgeworth for the unexpected sequel, having established him as an essential part of Phoenix's supporting cast in the previous game. But the so-called demon prosecutor had already ascended to fan-favorite status during Justice for All's development, which ironically made his inclusion in the sequel much more dubious. It became uncomfortably clear that featuring Edgeworth in Phoenix's sophomore story would mean the breakout character would suffer another handful of losses against his courtroom rival, further diminishing his status as a prosecutor prodigy. And so, in a move that would forever change the series, a new antagonist was designed to take the previous prosecutor's place.
Objection!
Occupying the imposing bench instead was 18-year-old Franziska von Karma, the exalted and ferocious daughter of Manfred von Karma, a central figure from the previous game's final case. Armed with a bullwhip and a chip on her right shoulder, the young lioness flew across the globe to stalk her firebird prey from the prosecutor's desk, seeking revenge on Wright by way of legal defeat and public humiliation. Having passed the bar exam at just 13 years old, Franziska played anything but second fiddle to Edgeworth, who had apparently disappeared following the events of the previous game. True to her heritage, Franziska was adorned with gothic garbs and outfitted with animations taken directly from her father, a technique commonly known as sprite mirroring. Though she's never matched Miles in popularity, Franziska has nonetheless amassed a passionate following in the years since her introduction in Justice for All. Her signature whip has helped her become a series icon, and has led to her considered inclusion in multiple Capcom fighting games. Franziska's apparent thirst for vengeance underscored one of the game's major motifs. 3 out of the 4 cases featured revenge as a key ingredient of the backstories and personalities that defined each episode, even if it wasn't always the motive for murder. Whether forged through overworking an employee or by way of a harmless prank between friends, Justice for All featured an armory of axes to grind, some deadly to the touch. Franziska's background represented another central idea: generational and familial baggage, as seen within the Fays, the found family at Berry Big Circus, or under the shadow of a world-famous prosecutor's legacy. But Justice for All's most prominent theme didn't come from any specific character. In fact, it was the opposite. Ace Attorney 2 charted Phoenix's excavations through massive emotional craters, the denizens of each still picking up the pieces from a key figure's sudden exit from their community. The invisible, inescapable void once occupied by a beloved sister, a celebrated circus member, or a disgraced mother. The bubbling resentment and silent despair exuding from almost every single character punctuated each case, and related back to the aggressive absence of Phoenix's one-time rival. These themes reached a boiling point in Justice for All's final case, Farewell, My Turnabout. Returning to the soaped-up underbelly of children's TV production first seen in Turnabout Samurai from the first game, Farewell, My Turnabout is Justice for All's emotional apex, and arguably, its crown jewel. Famed superstar Juan Corrida is murdered in his hotel room, and just as the investigation begins, a dangerous third party enters the picture, takes a hostage, and demands Phoenix clear the accused, Juan's industry rival Matt Angard, of all charges as efficiently as possible, putting the lawyer on a tense race against time. Takumi originally conceived the case's premise while working on the first game, and intended it to be the final chapter of the series, as he believed it brought the ongoing story's personal stakes to a natural crescendo, most notably with Phoenix himself. Having graduated from novelty character to series protagonist, Nick was afforded much more room to grow and develop as a character in Justice for All, his personal motivations for defending his clients repeatedly challenged by both his opponents and his allies. In no case was that clearer than Farewell, My Turnabout, which pushed the lawyer's convictions to their breaking point. The story additionally took both Phoenix's and the player's ethics into consideration. At a crucial moment near its finale, the player is prompted to make a fateful decision between the two opposing verdicts, daring to question their own sense of wrong and right. The increase in scope, gameplay, and emotional stakes were key components of Gyakuten Saiban 2, and to the relief of its creators, the public took notice. Weekly Famitsu's critics were impressed with the improved writing and pacing, rating the sequel a 35 out of 40, 3 points higher than the first game. Ace Attorney 2 didn't garner any awards attention, but its sales did more for the series' future than any gold statue ever could. While Gyakuten Saiban 1 sold modestly, the enduring positivity surrounding it propelled its follow-up to twice the sales numbers, selling close to 120,000 copies in 2.5 months. Though today it's seen as lesser than its predecessor, Justice for All remains a fan-favorite entry thanks to its cracking good prosecutor and thrilling final case, still considered one of the finest in the series. Beyond all reasonable doubt, Ace Attorney was now a GBA mainstay, and if Shinji Mikami's suggestion was any indication, the story wasn't over. There remained a final chapter in the tale of Phoenix Wright. In Part 3 of the Ace Attorney Retrospective, one of the greatest trilogies in video games comes to a close. The plight of the Faye family reaches its fiery climax, and Courtroom Number 4 plays host to phantoms of past and present.